I found that to be an incredibly compelling way to look at it. If government is this massive monster that's attacking you and your liberty and your livelihood, Democrats and Republicans are just two different heads.
One of them just has fewer teeth.
Yeah, well, I dispute that at this point. I think that they're just both of them are just as liable for the situation that we find ourselves in. And I just can't I cannot get around this idea that a promoting the idea of limited government, of peace, tolerance, free markets, and individualism. I mean, those are things that virtually every person that I talk to can relate to. They could say, "Well, absolutely, I want that." Well, yeah, I don't want corporations to have all this power and authority to be able to manipulate government. You know, and people are confused. They confuse free enterprise with corporations. They're two very different things. A free market and a corporation are not the same thing. Do you guys remember Johnson Controls? Are you familiar with that name? They're an auto parts manufacturer, and in 2008, when Detroit was looking for a bailout, they went to Capitol Hill and pleaded before the Senate panel to give the auto industry a bailout, saying if we didn't give them a bailout, that it was all going to be over. And they found out, they realized they got their bailout. They got about $80 billion worth. This is what who said this? Quote, speaking for our company, and I am sure for auto parts suppliers around the United States, we respectfully urge the members of this committee and the Congress as a whole to provide the financial support automakers need in this critical time, said their CEO, or their president, Keith Walden. That was in 2008. He said, please do this. Congress approved the bailout plan worth almost $80 billion for General Motors and Chrysler. And despite the federal government's rescue and the hundreds of millions of dollars in tax breaks over the last several decades from states like Michigan and Wisconsin, Johnson Controls said Monday that it was renouncing its United States corporate citizenship by selling itself to Tyco International, based in Ireland. It did so, it said, to reduce its tax bill, which would be decreased by $150 million annually. Now, let's talk for a minute. This is why it's important to differentiate between a corporation and a free market. You see, many people will look at that and say, look at those greedy, crooked corporations. They take all of this money from the American people, and then when they can find a way to save an extra buck, they'll shove it in your face and they'll move their entire company overseas. Well, this is a lesson learned. Just like that young gal. Remember the young gal who went on Cavuto's show?
Mm-hmm.
And she said, well, we'll just make the companies pay for it. She's the big Bernie Sanders fan that doesn't know anything about economics. And Cavuto said, well, what if they all just leave? And she was like,
What? What do you mean?
What do you mean? Well, what if they leave America? Oh, well, I don't really think that's going to happen. It is happening. They will leave. There's nothing wrong with greed as long as you don't hurt somebody else in your desire to achieve more wealth. A company's job is to create a profit so that people will want to invest in that company, so that workers will be able to work there, so that good products will be able to be developed and sold. Here's a wild and crazy idea. If a company will turn its back on the country after it's been given millions and millions and millions of dollars in bailout money and tax breaks, how about this? Stop giving it to them. Stop giving them the money. Stop giving handouts to companies and bailouts to industries and then expecting them somehow to act in the public good, to feel some sense of loyalty to you. Don't you remember all the millions of dollars we gave you? Yeah, we appreciate that, but I can save $150 million a year if I move to Ireland. So, see ya. Remember, we talked at the beginning of the show about everyone's desire to pursue their own self interest? This is a fundamental principle of economics that people pursue their own self interest. What government needs to do is stop giving bailouts to people. They need to let companies fail. They need to let banks fail. They need to say, sorry, you took on the risk. If you're going to get all of the reward that comes from running a successful company, you're also going to take on the risk. And you're going to be held accountable when you fail. But how do we do that? See, how do we hold companies accountable? Well, a guy like Bernie Sanders will tell you, and frankly, a guy like Donald Trump will tell you, that the way that we do this is we apply regulation, we apply government pressure, we create a new agency, we create a new bureaucracy to watch them, to manage them, to tax them, to punish them, to try and force them to do what we want them to do. But what does that do? Well, it just creates another agency that's corruptible. It creates another vehicle for the company and the industry to funnel money into Washington in order to have legislation, in order to have regulation crafted in their favor. You cannot solve this problem by regulating it away. If that was true, it'd be gone by now, folks. You telling me the government at this stage doesn't know how to regulate? It most certainly does. The reason that this problem persists is because it is a natural problem that occurs in the market. And what needs to happen is the government needs to step aside. If the government would quit bailing out companies, if it would quit providing millions of dollars in subsidies to this industry or this company over that company, then companies and banks would be forced to reevaluate their risk. They'd be forced to do that or fail. And this will be a learning experience for companies because as of right now, the government has trained large companies. Hey, if you get into trouble, here's the process for getting some government money. Hey, if you want to move to a new city, here's the process for getting some government money. And it's going to take a little bit of time and a little bit of pain as a few of these companies fail and they don't get the bailout before everybody else gets the picture. Hey, there's no magic pile of money coming from the government. You wait. Mark my words, as the oil industry continues to collapse, you're going to have more and more people coming out suggesting that what needs to happen is the oil industry needs a bailout. This is going to happen every time there's a downturn in the economy. Every time a company or an industry gets over-leveraged and it starts to lose, you're going to have people screaming, saying that this is more than about the industry. It's more than about these companies. It's about protecting Americans. Why? Because it's always about protecting you. That's the line they're going to feed you every single time, is it's about protecting you. But it's not. Bernie Sanders talks about a wealth transfer from the 99% to the top 1%. You want to know where that wealth transfer is happening? You want to know who's facilitating that? Your government is. Your government facilitates the transfer of wealth from those who have power to the government and then back again. If there is a wealth transfer happening in America, it's not happening by rich people stealing from poor people. It's from government stealing and redistributing it as it sees fit. It has to stop. You have to be willing to go out and speak your mind about it. You have to be willing to share.